Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Fire in the Hole. And we are recording this live for our Zoom fellowship, as well as for the YouTube channel. So this is Natan Lawrence, Hoshana Rabbah. Some people think I have two names. I really only have one name. Nathan is my given name, but in Hebrew that's Natan, N-A-T-A-N. So either I answer to either one. Some people know me by one, some people know me by the other, and either one is fine. It doesn't matter to me. And as they say, you can call me anything, just don't call me late for dinner. No, don't call me anything. I don't want to be called certain things. And I don't think anybody else does either. But if you do it with a smile on your face and good intent in your heart, then I'll probably answer. Otherwise, probably not. I'll hang up on you. Anyway. So I'm excited about this teaching. I've given it before, but it's been a while, and I'd like to really give it as part of this Torah portion. As we're going through the Torah portion for this week, which is Kitisa, I believe. Yes, no, that's another one. Tetze. a lot of Torah portions that sound alike. And we want to focus today on Deuteronomy 24. Now, this is a big subject, but I'm not going to focus on the divorce and remarriage aspects of things as far as how it applies to people today. I've written about that. You can go on my blog and look up the catchphrase or the keyword divorce and remarriage. And this is a very, very hot subject, and we'll talk about it briefly, but I don't really want to get into the legalities of it too much. We're going to take it up to the allegorical level, the drosh level. There's 4 levels of biblical understanding: Peshat, Remez, Drosh, and Sod. And we're not going to deal so much with the Peshat, or the plain meaning of the text. We will read it, but then we're going to talk about its spiritual implications. And this is really an exciting subject. This is not a subject that I connected the dots on. I have expanded on it and elucidated on it. But this is a teaching that was given to me, or I heard it from a Torah teacher many, many years ago. And then I realized, I found out that he didn't originate it either. I was back in 2008, my wife and I visited the land of Israel, and we're getting ready to come home, and I'm sitting in the airport at Tel Aviv, and I'm wearing one of my tunics that I got from Reuven Prager. Many of you know him. He's the one that has Beged Ivri, which is Hebrew for Hebrew clothing. We've known Reuben for almost 20 years, and he's a good friend. And we visited his place in Israel. He was out of town, but we visited his apartment, which is like a museum. And anyway, I was wearing one of his tunics. I have a lot of his clothing, robes and tunics and things. You've seen me wear some of them on special occasions here. He's a tailor, he's a Levite, and he makes a lot of things that relate to first century and temple type things. Anyway, so I'm sitting in the airport, and there's another man wearing a Beged Ivri tunic, and I go over to him, and we start talking, and he's flying out of Israel. He's from Texas, and I forgot his first name, but his last name is Ovale. He's actually a Sephardic Jewish man. I think he's Jewish. Anyway, we got talking, and he told me that he's the one that made the teaching I'm about to give. He's the one that received the revelation of this teaching. I go, no kidding. And he also was one who was a very, very close friend and a major financial supporter of Reuben Prager, allowed him to travel across the United States and present his teachings on Hebrew clothing and the tzitzits and the the holy half shekel and so forth. And this, I don't know, maybe Brother Terry knows him, but this man is a geologist. I believe he's a geologist and he works for oil companies. He's from Texas somewhere, and he's a Messianic, and I think he might have had a congregation. But anyway, he's the one that came up with this teaching. And so I'll give him credit. Anyway, and of course, I've added to it like everything. Revelation comes along the way, and hallelujah. So, but there's such a wonderful teaching, and this expands, what I'm about to give expands the message of the gospel, the message of the cross. Basically, I like so many things in the Christian church, the Christians are feeding on the crumbs that have fallen from the table. And the crumbs themselves are glorious, because the things that are based on the word, one little sentence, one phrase, let's say like John 3:16, it is so full of meaning. Just one verse in the Bible, and there's many other verses. We could pick that out, and they're life-changing and transformative. But this message expands the whole message of the gospel to places that the Christian church has no clue about and has not been teaching for 2,000 years. And now I'm going to skim over this fairly quickly, but I have all of my notes. I posted them up on my blog. You can go to hoshanarabah.org, click on the blog button, and you'll see I posted all my notes with all the scriptures. There's about, 6 or 7 pages of notes. And if you want to go over this again, go over it, read the notes, all the scriptures, everything is there, and you can get it all, because there's a lot. You may want to go over it again to digest it, but this is really, really important information, and it covers a lot of bases. We tag a lot of bases. So I have my notes here. I'm going to kind of be reading out. These are my own commentary notes. And we are going to end up in Deuteronomy 24, which is this week's Torah portion. But I want to start first in Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7. And we'll read this real quickly. And you'll remember this verse, probably these passages from your time in the Christian church. And I'm reading here from the New King James Bible, the Cambridge edition, or the Cambridge is the publisher. And the little subheading at the top of chapter 7, this is not inspired, this is just man's little commentary. It says, freed from the law. Freed, as in freedom, freed from the law. And this is the traditional Christian understanding of this passage, that is a total lie and a false teaching, as we will see. But let me read it. It's verses 1 through verse 6. Or do you not know, brethren, for I speak to those who know the law. And the word law there is referring to the Torah. That the law has dominion over a man as long as he lives. For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. So then, if while her husband lives, she marries another man, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from the law, from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she has married another man. Therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law. Have you heard that phrase? You're dead to the law in the Christian church? This phrase has been cherry-picked out of context and thrown at people who want to go back and keep the Torah. Okay, keep that in mind. Therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law through the body of Christ, that you may be married to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit to God. For when we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit to death. But now we have been delivered from the law, having died to what we were held to by, so that we should serve in the newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So, as you all know, this verse has been interpreted by mainstream Christianity for almost 2,000 years to mean that we do not have to keep the law. The law of Moses, which is really the law that God gave to Israel, Elohim gave to Israel and to Moses, no longer is binding upon us. That because of our relationship to Yeshua, he fulfilled the law, he did it for us, so we don't have to do it. Which I guess means now it's all right to go out and murder, to steal, to commit adultery, to fornicate, to have sex with animals, to go to witches, and practice all kinds of other sexual sin, to lie, to worship idols, to take Elohim's name in vain, and so forth and so on. Well, they will come back immediately and say, we don't have to do the ceremonial law. The moral law we have to do. So all those things would be moral laws. So they separate out the Torah into moral and ceremonial. Well, then you say, well, because those things that had to do with the Levitical priesthood and the tabernacle service, those are the ceremonial laws. And that's based on a perversion, a twisting of a particular verse in the book of Galatians, which we won't get into. And it's one verse after another that they twist and they take out of context. And this is now what all of mainstream Christianity believes. And I'm not going to get into it. We could go in and just discuss that alone. Where in Galatians it talks about the rites and the ceremonies. Well, Hebrews makes it very clear that what he's talking about there is the Levitical priesthood and the sacrificial system. He's not talking about all the rest of the Torah. Those ceremonial laws relate to those things that were road signs that pointed to Yeshua and that he fulfilled at the cross. We don't have to sacrifice animals anymore, and we no longer have a Levitical priesthood. And so it's no those things. Yeshua is our great high priest, and he was what those things pointed to. And again, the writer of Hebrews makes that very clear. But people have taken this, and then they say, well, the Sabbath, what about the Sabbath, the fourth commandment? Well, that's part of the ceremonial law. And I say, with big letters, family friendly, BS. Call it for what it is, horse dung, cow dung, whatever. The Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath was never part of the ceremonial law. It goes back to the creation. It was given to the children of Israel before they were even given the priesthood and the sacrificial system. And it goes on, and the Sabbath is forever. So, all of their arguments fall flat and hold no water. And the argument that Paul says that we're dead to the law, he goes on in the same verse. Verse 7, is the law sin? Certainly not. Verse 12, the law is holy, just, and good. The commandments are just and good. And in verse 14, I delight in the Torah of God according to the inward man. In another place he says, does the grace of God, do we sin because we're under grace? God forbid. Over and over and over and over again. And then he goes on in verse, chapter 8, he says, for to be carnally minded is death, verse 6, and to be spiritually minded is life and peace, because the carnal mind is enmity. It's against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, the Torah of Elohim, nor indeed can be. So then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. The implication is by living sinfully and by going against the Torah. This is what he's saying here. And yet people take these verses out of Scripture out of context, and they twist it and turn it upside down, all because of what he says in Matthew in the next chapter, verse 7. For the carnal mind is enmity. It is contrary to the Torah of Elohim. It is not subject to it, and never and cannot be, because it is subject to the flesh nature and to the influences of the world and the devil. So anyway, that's a brief overview of how the Christian church views that passage. And it's sickening, it's demonic, it's blasphemous. Let's call it for what it is. I'm gonna take the cover off the garbage can and call it demonic. This is a doctrine of a demon. And for these teachers to be teaching these things, that the Satan, the devil himself, at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, questioned the law of Elohim and tempted man and woman to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and to sin and to go against the commandments of Elohim. And this is exactly what this false interpretation of this verse is doing. It's acquiescing to the lies and the delusions of the adversary, the devil, and believing what the devil teaches. Now, this is not going to preach in all your Sunday churches. It's not going to preach on Christian television or Christian radio, because it goes against everything, almost everything they believe with regard to, so much of what they teach. But if we're going to come back to the Bible and be the bride that Yeshua wants us to be, and the saints who are those who keep his commandments and have the testimony of Yeshua, as it says in Revelation 12 and as well as chapter 14, and we're going to eat from the tree of life, then we're going to have to be keeping his commandments, as it says in Revelation 22. And if we want to be the bride of Yeshua and be the greatest in the kingdom, as it says, as far as rewards go, as it says in Matthew 5 verse 19, and also as it says about being the bride in Revelation 19 verse 7 and 8, and we're going to wear those robes of righteousness, which are the righteous deeds of the saints. And the Bible defines righteousness, Psalm 119, 172, as all of his commandments, and that means doing his commandments, walking in righteousness. Then we're back to the Torah. Okay, so if this verse is not saying what this passage in the book of Romans is not saying, what traditional mainstream Christianity is teaching, then what is it saying? And that's the beautiful message that Paul, the brilliant legal scholar, the Torah scholar, is bringing out. And that's what I want to share with you today. So let's go back. To understand what he is saying here in Romans chapter 7, we've got to go back to the Torah and understand the context of what he is talking about. So let's go back to Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 5. And I'm quoting, "When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, and found her a matter of immorality, or found her offensive in some respect." These are different translations. I'm quoting from the King James, but these are some other ways some other translations translate, "has found some uncleanliness in her." Then it goes on, "Then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and give it to her hand, and give it in her hand, and sendeth her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband," that would be her first husband, "which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is an abomination before Jehovah, And thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which Yehovah your Elohim giveth thee for an inheritance. So, the Bible does permit divorce and remarriage. Contrary to what a lot of false teachers teach, the Torah permits divorce and remarriage, but under very strict conditions. The question is, what are those strict conditions? And we really don't know. We can speculate all that we want, but we really don't know. And just to keep this teaching rather short, I'm going to pass over a lot of the really technical details. You can go back and read my article on that. I go into it. But the word uncleanness is the word ervah in the Hebrew. E-R-V-A-H, ervah. And you can look it up in Strong's. You can look it up in Gesenius. You can look it up in Bowers Lexicon. You can look it up in the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. You can look it up, and nobody knows exactly what it means. It could be one of the things she could be. It could be that she was not a virgin when he found, when they went to consummate the marriage, and it certainly implies that. But if you go into the Hebrew and you look at the words, as I bring out in my article, that's not the only thing that it implies. It's some other gross, abominable sin that somehow it was discovered at that time when they went to consummate the marriage, or within that very short time frame, that the husband discovered about her. And it was grounds for her to be divorced and write her a bill of divorce and to send her away. Now, the meaning of the word ervah, we do not, like I said, nobody knows, including the very best scholars going clear back to the time of Yeshua, did not know exactly what that word meant. And they still don't. So because of that, there's been a lot of interpretations. I've got a number of rabbinical scholars up here, their commentaries, and you go back and read the commentaries, and they skip over that. They do not get into this debate. It's my understanding that during the first century, when Yeshua was debating the Pharisees, at that time there were two schools of the Pharisees, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. And the school of Hillel was, one was a little bit more liberal in their interpretations of the Torah. They were still very strict, but one was a little bit more lenient, and the other one was a little bit more strict. One of them believed that you could divorce your wife for any reason. If she burnt the toast, she wasn't a good housekeeper, whatever. The other one was more, it had to be a specific sexual sin or whatever. And Yeshua came down on the side of the stricter side of things. He said, this was not how it was meant to be. It was one wife, one husband, one wife, one flesh forever. They became one flesh. And what Elohim hath put together, let no man break apart. But because of the hardness of people's hearts, because of sin, things happen. Now, when I was pastoring, I performed a number of marriages, but I refused to. There were as many or more marriages that I refused to do because I did not know whether they were legally, whether their divorce was legal from the previous people, which I didn't know. These would be people that would come into our congregation. They'd want me to marry them. And I didn't know if they were legal. They had legal grounds to get divorced in the first place, much less be remarried. So I would just say, look, I can't marry you. Just go to a local judge or whatever and have somebody else marry you. And as long as you're married legally in the eyes of the state, whether you're legal before Yah or not, that's between you and him. I don't want to get involved in it because, there's no way to know. And you can't usually interview the person that they were married to previously. So I just didn't marry them. So that's how I got around that. I only married people who I felt had legal grounds for, biblical grounds for divorce. And those biblical, and I'm not going to get into all that. I've gotten into that before. I'm not going to get into that now. There are legal grounds for biblical divorce. Some people don't even accept that. But Yeshua himself said, because of the hardness of their hearts, you might be married to an abuser. You might be married to a criminal. You might be married to a drug addict or whatever. And I don't think Yah expects you, or a heathen, or somebody that turns on you and renounces their faith, and just, I believe there are legal grounds, but they're not as many as a lot of people want to say. Okay, so I'm not going to visit that subject. I get into a lot of details, but nobody knows what erva is, except in the Hebrew, Yeshua said Moses allowed for divorce on the basis of, and the Greek is the word porneia, where we get pornography from. And again, if you look up the word porneia in any lexicon, it's just general sexual sin. That's what porneia means. So that isn't helpful either. But anyway, I don't want to land on that particular subject. I've done videos on that. I've written on that, and given people my best understanding of it. And every time I do, I get all kinds of people, almost hate mail. No matter what you say, you're going to land on the wrong side of the subject. And I don't really have a dog in the fight because I'm married to my first and only wife. It's the only woman I've ever been with. That's it. I haven't been with any other women. So it doesn't personally affect me. I don't have a dog in the fight or an axe to grind or anything to justify. By the grace of Yah, he's kept us married for over 30 years and 4 children. So I praise Yah for that. But not everybody, it's just the way things are. So that is the Peshat level, the simple plain meaning of the text. Now we want to jump up to the drosh level, the allegorical level. And again, you'll have to forgive me, but I'm not going to go through all the scriptures. I'm going to go over the top of the scriptures. You'll go back and get I could very easily talk on this for 2 hours, but I don't want to. Before we started recording, in the Zoom meeting, we had, I made the comment, there were so many wonderful testimonies of miracles and of Yah intervening in our lives, and we shared some testimonies. There was some good little preaching by different people, and that shared their insights, for which I'm very, very grateful, very edifying. And you don't need me. You guys can do it yourself. You don't need me. But and I said, look, we could stop right here and this would be fine. So I want to give everybody more opportunity to share, so you can go back and get the details. But if you know your Bible at all, you know that Yah married Israel, ancient Israel, there at Mount Sinai. And she said, I do 3 times to him. And it was a marriage covenant. It was called the Mosaic Covenant or the Sinaitic Covenant, but it was also a marriage covenant. And in Exodus, Ezekiel 16, and other places, you can go get those notes, the scripture references on my notes. Ezekiel talks about allegorically about Yah finding Israel, and when she was a baby, and she became a young lady, and he married her, and then eventually she went into harlotry and whoredoms. And you can read in all the prophets, they talk about the adulteries. We're talking about spiritual adultery. So the spiritual adultery of Israel, when they went a-whoring after the other nations and the gods of other nations. And that's one reason in the Torah, again and again, he says, do not learn the ways of the heathens. Well, that's actually Jeremiah chapter 10, where he's talking about the precursor to the Christmas tree. He says, don't learn the ways of the heathens. But throughout the Torah and in Deuteronomy, Moses is constantly instructing, as he's about to pass from the scene, he's constantly instructing the people, don't have anything to do with the heathens. Don't intermarry with them. Don't hang out with them. Don't learn their ways. Get rid of their stuff. Get rid of them. Kick them out of the land. But as soon as Joshua died, we go into the book of Joshua and we get into the Judges. That's exactly what they did. And that's been going on with the people of Elohim to this very day. We all know people who have turned away from the Bible. They were kids, were raised in church. Their families took them to church. They taught them the Bible at home, and then when they get out on their own, slippery slope. One thing leads to another. Next thing you know, they're sleeping with their girlfriend. They're out doing drugs. They're out getting drunk. They're out partying. They're not keeping the Sabbath. They're not doing the Torah. And on and on. We all know. We see examples of this. It's very sad. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't come back. And it's heartbreaking for parents and grandparents or people who are friends of these young people or older people or whoever. But it happens. Well, anyway, this is what happened to Israel. They went a-whoring, and eventually they were all taken into captivity, as you well know. Now, Yah, in numerous places in the Tanakh or the Old Testament, he says, I'm going to go back and I'm going to remarry Israel. I'm going to remarry them. They were dispersed to all over the world because of their sin. They were kicked out of the land and they were dispersed and they intermarried with people in the heathen lands. But I'm going to call them back. I'm going to call them back from all the lands where to the far coastlands and the islands of the sea. I'm going to call them back. And I've written about that. Others have written about that. And there's numerous whole books of the Bible are about that. Isaiah is all about that. The whole book of Isaiah, almost the whole thing is about that. And how the Messiah to come is going to be regathering them. Jeremiah talks about, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Jacob, house of Judah, and that's in Jeremiah 31, and then this is repeated in Hebrews 8, and that's the new covenant. So he talks about regathering, and this regathering started with Yeshua, the Messiah, and it's been going on for the last 2,000 years as the gospel has been being preached, even by the somewhat apostate church, including the Catholic Church. Even though there's a lot of paganism, there's a lot of truth in what they're preaching, and they've been gathering the lost sheep of the house of Israel in, and little by little, Elohim has been restoring his people at different levels through the restoration of truth. And so now here we are, the Hebrew roots restoration, which is started with the Catholic Church. They got away from it all. The Protestant Reformation began to bring back a little more truth, and then the Baptists and the Methodists, little by little. And some people don't like what I'm saying, but I don't care. This is the truth. They've all brought back little bits of truth. And then you had John Wesley and Charles Finney, and you had the other revivalists in the 1800s, John Calvin back in the 1500s. And then you had the charismatic, the Pentecostal and the charismatic renewals. They brought back more of the spirit. And yeah, it was mixed in with a lot of garbage. I get that. I've been in some of those churches. I get it. And then you had the Jews for Jesus movement. Herbert Armstrong, the Worldwide Church of God, which I was born and raised in, started in the 1930s. and they brought back the feast days and the Jews for Jesus. They started in the late 60s, but the Messianic movement started in the late 1800s, and really started like in the 1930s. So that was the Jewish thing, Herbert Armstrong, and that was a cult. I was born and raised in that, and they had some good things. They had a lot of bad things. I'm not afraid to say that. My parents went to his Bible college. I was born there. They were married with that man standing next to them in their wedding pictures, and that's why I was born and raised with the feast, the Sabbath, the dietary laws, and so forth. But they didn't go far enough, and then because they didn't have a Hebraic understanding, and these were all developments in moving this thing forward. And none of us are in the churches we were born and raised in. We all have been growing and to where we are now, and where we will end up, I don't know. We're going to end up like Yeshua, but anyway, eventually. So this restoration of truth has been an ongoing thing. The regathering of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, and it started with Yeshua, the chief shepherd. He sent his disciples to gather in the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and the final regathering will be taking place in the end of the age, and it will continue into the millennium. But now let's get back. I don't even know where I'm at on my notes here. Anyway, let's get back to Hosea. So Hosea was a prophet who lived this out. I mean, imagine being Hosea. So Elohim, he was a godly, righteous man, and Yah told him to go marry a woman, a loose woman, a woman of harlotry, a woman he already knew was predisposed to philandering and committing adultery and that kind of thing. But he told her to marry, Yah told Hosea to marry Gomer. And they got married, and along the way, they had some children, and then she went into harlotry. She was unfaithful to him, but he still loved her. And she hopped from bed to bed, and she basically hooked up with all these other men until eventually she became a prostitute, and she was like almost like a slave, and a sexual slave. And he went and he basically redeemed her, bought her back out of that, and remarried her. And she didn't. I guess she didn't really marry any of those, but he brought her back, and he took her back to himself. And they had some more children. And Yah said, "I want you to name these children," and he gave them names. Not my people, lo ami, ruamah, have mercy, ruchama. And, there were 3 children. And he said, what you, Hosea, have gone through is what I have gone through with my people Israel. And I want you to prophesy about what you went through. And because that's what I've been going through. And eventually I'm going to bring my people back, and I'm going to remarry them. But there's one catch. How can you remarry somebody who's gone off, committed adultery, and maybe married somebody else, and you gave them a bill of divorce? Because that's what the Bible says. Again, you can go read the scriptures. I've written about this. I don't have time to go into it. But Yah gave Israel a bill of divorce, a get in Hebrew. You're done. He put her away because she was so unfaithful. She sold herself into sin. But how can he remarry Israel and be faithful and true to Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 5? How is it possible? Because the Torah says you cannot go back and remarry somebody you put away and is now married to somebody else. And that is what Paul is talking about here in Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7 is he's not referring to all of the Torah, all 613. Let's go back and look at it. He's referring to it. He says here, and I'm reading again from the New King James. He says, first of all, verse 2, the law of her husband. This is not all 613. This is referring to a specific law. I'll get back to that point. We'll get into some Greek grammar. And then he says, and the law of her husband, and it says here in my Bible, it says, verse 3, that law, a specific law. Now, if you look at all the places where it has the word nomos, which is the Greek word for law, which we can show that this is elsewhere, this is referring to the Torah. Every place where it says the law, in verse 1, verse 2, end of verse 2, verse 3, the word that in my New King James Bible, or dead to the law, verse 4, the law. We see again, verse 5, the law. And again in verse 6. So it's about 6 or 7 times. It's the same Greek word. It's the definite article, the. Is spelled in Greek, it's tau. Or actually two. T-O-U. We would spell T-O-U, but it's the definite article. I believe it would be in the nominative form of the definite article, the. It'd be the first case. It'd be nominative. The law. And it would be probably nominative masculine. I'd have to go back and look and see what gender nomos is. I think it's masculine, but don't quote me on that. The law, the definite article is different than the indefinite article. So in English, we don't have genders, masculine, female, or masculine, female, and neuter, as they do in Koine Greek. But when we say the law versus a law, the law is referring to a specific law. So in this case, it could refer to the law of Moses as a whole, as opposed to, some other legal code somewhere else out there. But that's very different than a law. A law called a law. When the article a it's called an indefinite article, and it can refer to any law. But when you say the law, that's a definite article. It's referring to a definite, specific law. But there's more to it than that. In the case here, and they captured it in the New King James Bible and some of the other translations also. You can look at my notes and you'll see it. I list the translations that do this. I think they all do it. The New American Standard, the NIV, and so forth. But anyway, the King James, the New King James. But the word that here, that is a demonstrative pronoun. This or that. How can they both be the same word? Like I said, every place in this passage where it says the law or that law, it's still the Greek word to. T-O, spelled T-O-U in English. But according to Greek grammar, the definite article to can be what they call a weak demonstrative pronoun, and it can mean this or that. Now, and I forget, I studied Greek for a year at the college level, and I forget what the definite article or the relative pronouns in Greek are that would for that. But anyway, I could pull that information out very quickly. But according to my Greek grammar, and when I was studying Greek, I was using the Basics in Greek Grammar by William Mounce, which is, here we go. This is the textbook that we study from. He is probably the top Greek scholar in the English language. The reason I say, or at least that has written a book, this book is used by 3/4 of the Christian seminaries and Bible colleges in America. This book, and this is what I studied. It's about a 400 and some odd page book. Anyway, so he's a scholar. He has a commentary, or he has a whole lexicon. He has everything. This guy is very brilliant. And based on what he says and others, he says that this can be a weak demonstrative pronoun. And I quote him in some other sources. I think also Vines may say that. Zodiades also. Some of you are familiar with Spiros Zodiades, also another Greek scholar. He has, well, I've got his lexicon, and he's written the Keyword Study Bible, and some of you may have that Bible, which I've got that Bible as well. And so both of these guys say that, and I quote them. So all that to say this, without getting too far in the weeds, Paul is referring to a specific law here. And the only law that this could be referring to is what we just read. Well, this law here in Deuteronomy 24. And the marriage law as a whole, where if a person dies, they are freed from the law. Well, the Christians will say, well, Christ died, so now we're free from the law. Or we died when we got baptized, and we're free from the law. Which then means we can go back and violate the law and sin, which is ridiculous, like I said at the beginning. So if Elohim, if God, Elohim, in this case, I would say Yehovah Yeshua, the Son, is going to remarry Israel, how can he remarry her without violating this law after she became somebody else's husband? He cannot do this. It's not possible. And yet the prophets said, and the word of Elohim says, and the whole book of Hosea is about, that he would do this. And this is where the rest of the story comes in. What if the husband dies for his wife? See where I'm going with this? What if the husband dies for his wife? Because remember, under the Torah, the penalty for adultery is death. Death penalty. What if the husband, though, takes and dies vicariously in the place of his wife? And the penalty of the law is satisfied. That would be like me breaking a law, and I owe $1 billion, and there's no way I can pay it. And the judge says you owe $1 billion and then you're free. And somebody comes in and pays it for me. Just like, writes a check for $1 billion. That's, if the husband dies for the wife, then he's paid for her. She gets to go free, but now he's dead. And so how can he remarry her? Because he's died. However, what if the husband is the creator of the universe, the one who made every human being? His life is worth more than all the human beings, the total of all the human beings that he himself created, because the creator is always worth more than the created. What if he died to pay the death penalty for her? And then what if he resurrected as a new person? He's not who he was before. Yeah, spirit, in the spirit realm, in the spirit, but not physically. Because he's now somebody else. And what about Israel, though? She cannot go back and remarry her husband, because that's an abomination, according to Deuteronomy 24. What about her? Well, what about if she dies and becomes a new creation? A spiritual entity. What is baptism a picture of? It's identifying with the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua, so that he took his death penalty, or our death penalty for our sins upon himself. And then we identify with his death, burial, and resurrection. And we come up out of that watery grave as a new creation in him. Galatians 2:20, 2 Corinthians 5:17. But we're not the bride of Messiah yet. We still have a physical body that sins. But when we receive our glorified body at the resurrection, we will be totally a new creation, a spiritual entity, just like he is. And in this way, two new people who have been freed from the legal restraints or constraints of the Torah because of sin, because of adultery, can remarry, or marry, really, in a sense, for the first time. And yet, Yeshua is remarrying Israel, but not the same Israel. He's not marrying a Gentile bride, FYI, newsflash. There's nowhere in the Bible that says he's going to go back and marry the Gentiles. That is a lie, another lie from the pit of hell. And we've addressed that one many times, this Jew-Gentile thing. He's going to remarry all the people that Israel fornicated and committed adultery with and mixed herself with the Gentiles, as it says in Hosea. And the message of the gospel is a gigantic fishnet to draw all these people in. That Israel, both houses of Israel, Judah and Ephraim, have intermarried with, and who knows who is whose now. And even if you are not a biological descendant of Israel, like Ruth, like Rahab, like Joseph's wife, when he married the Egyptian wife in Egypt, even then, you were without God and hope, and a Gentile, as it says in Ephesians chapter 11, or 2, verse 11. And if you come to Messiah, you are then grafted in, Romans 11, into the olive tree of Israel. You are brought into the covenants of Israel, become part of the nation of Israel, Ephesians 2. And now you, through Yeshua the Messiah, the middle wall of partition is broken down. You can enter into the Holy of Holies, become part of Israel, part of the Commonwealth, the nation of Israel, and the covenants of Israel. And now you are part of the one new man, where you are now a son of Abraham, Galatians 5:28, where there's neither Jew nor Gentile, Galatians 5:28 and 5:29. And now you can enter the New Jerusalem as a new person and the bride of Yeshua through one of the 12 gates, as it says in Revelation 21, verse 12. And there is no Gentile gate. This is how Yehovah is going to pull it all together and bring everybody in who has faith in Yeshua and marry his new bride, which is still continuation of the old bride, but is the new redeemed Israel of Elohim at a spiritual level. Paul, that's what this scripture is saying. And we have been freed from the death penalty because of Yeshua. We are not under, because we died. And when you die at baptism, all the past sins are wiped away. And then you stay under the blood of Yeshua, keep repenting as you stumble along the way. And we are not married to him yet. We are betrothed. We are engaged, to use a modern term. And we will be married when he returns. That's the new covenant. That's when the new covenant will be what's called the everlasting covenant. That's when the new covenant will be fully implemented forever. We are in the transition between the two. Go read Hebrews 8. I've written about that too. We are betrothed as we're in the new covenant, but it hasn't been finalized yet. We are in the what's called the erosine, or the betrothal stage, and Yeshua betrothed himself to his disciples and to us at Passover, at the Last Supper. And when we do take communion at every time we do a Passover Seder, we are renewing our covenant and promising to be faithful to him till the very end. And then at his coming, he will marry us. That's where he drinks of the fourth cup of the 4 cups of the Passover Seder. That's called the cup of praise. I've written about that, made videos about that. And that will happen at around Yom Kippur, or between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, or maybe probably between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And with his bride, who meets him in the air, comes out of she comes out of her house, and he comes from heaven, where he's provided a place for her in his Father's house, and they meet in the air. That's called the rapture. It's not the rapture that the church teaches, the pre-tribulation rapture, but it's the catching away, meeting Yeshua in the air. And we've talked a lot about that. Everything is being pulled together here. And then eventually the bride and the bridegroom will celebrate the wedding supper of the wedding supper of the Lamb, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. And then they will go out, and as the bride, then the glorified resurrected saints will then gather in during the millennium the people around the world who are physical human beings who continue to live into the millennium out of this physical earth after the apocalypse of the book of Revelation. And they will begin to gather in the great fall harvest and children to this marriage. So that is the greater message behind the death of Yeshua and how that ties in with the Torah. And it doesn't change anything about the basic gospel message about salvation by grace through faith. It doesn't change what the church has been teaching about, he saved us by his death. He died for our sins. It doesn't change any of that. That message is still true. This just expands it into the whole Bible and the whole plan of salvation, and ties it into the Torah, ties it into the prophets, the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, the marriage, the feasts, and of Yehovah, which are the 7 steps in the plan of salvation. It ties it in to the prophecies of the Old Testament, the prophets, and how they were prophesying about all Israel, being saved, and marriage, and adultery, and remarriage, and all of that. So I hope that this teaching has accomplished several things. I hope it has made you fall in love with Yeshua all the more, and for what he has done for you, and the Father, what he did when he sent his Son, number 1. Number 2, I hope this message has energized you and excited you again and anew about the basic gospel message, which we've all known since we were children, but to realize how great and how much more genius it is. Only from the mind of Elohim could he come up with this, to use this, what the devil tried to get in and mess up, but Yah is back there behind the scenes, orchestrating everything and gathering his children to him. And I hope it also inspires you for the wonderment of the Bible and how everything in the Bible from the very beginning all interrelates, is all interconnected like this rich fabric, this tapestry, like this puzzle with 1,000 pieces, and we put it all together in all of its little pictures or pieces, and we see this glorious picture that, quite frankly, I can't wrap my brain around. And I hope, most importantly, that the people that are listening to this, whether it's on Zoom or on YouTube or wherever it may go out, that it will cause you to awake spiritually and help to revive you in your faith in the word of Elohim, your faith in his plan of salvation, your faith in Yeshua, and your love, and it will spark revival in each one of us, because the world needs this message. The world needs to appreciate the gospel. Many people have gotten tired of, sadly, have gotten tired of hearing the gospel message. So they're off learning about aliens, or learning about the Nephilim, or learning about, Gnostic concepts, or learning about the flat earth, or learning about, some arcane mystical stuff in Hebrew, in the Jewish writings, the Talmud or the Kabbalah or whatever, all following this tangent or that tangent, when the gospel is all we need. There are so many things we don't even begin to understand about it, and this is just one little thing that the door has been opened up to. So to our understanding. So, I say to the people watching on YouTube, if this message has been a blessing to you, send it out. Send it out, and maybe it'll encourage and stir some people up. Press the like button, subscribe. There's more teachings like this all over the place on this channel. But spread the news. I'm not asking for your money. I'm not asking for anything. Just asking that you spread the good news and be one of those people that helps to let the light go forth, to be a blessing to other people, and bring in the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's all I have for you today. Blessings to you. All right, shalom.